So, meaning, right? That's our topic this morning. You guys remember? I mean, we've spoken about this. If you are in TGIF circles, then you've heard this many times. But the buses driving there in England, I think it was early 2000s, with the words "God probably doesn't exist. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life." And Richard Dawkins and some of the other atheists were behind these advertisements, and they called themselves the New Atheists. But the only thing that was really new about them, because in terms of the accusations and the arguments that they level against Christianity, all of that has been heard before. But what made them new was the fact that they were quite triumphalist about their discovery. So in the past, the guys, the atheists, were not as excited about the non-existence of God, but these guys were quite excited about the non-existence of God. They were rather evangelistic, and that was the only thing that was new about them. So if you think of guys like Jean-Paul Sartre in the 1960s, he was less excited, less triumphalistic about this atheism. So this is what Sartre says. The existentialists think it very distressing that God does not exist, because all possibility of finding values in a heaven of ideas disappear along with him. There can no longer be an a priori good, since there is no infinite and perfect consciousness to think it. Nowhere is it written that the good exists, that we must be honest, that we must not lie, because the fact is that we are on a plane where there are only men. Neither within him or without does man find anything to cling to. So in other words, this is Jean-Paul Sartre, and he said, "Well, look, this is not the prettiest picture that there is, but we believe that God does not exist, and along with God goes meaning as well." And Camus and Sartre and these guys were very honest about the implications of God's non-existence. So sticking with the French, and by the way, I'm going to give you a bit of death by quotes this morning, so my apologies for that. You have a guy, Jacques Monod. He says this. He says, "The ancient covenant is in pieces. Man knows that at last he is alone in the universe, unfeeling immensity, out of which he emerged only by chance. His destiny is nowhere spelled out, nor his duty." So there's nothing special about humanity. We're not made in the image of God. It is a cosmic lottery that has coughed us up. And I don't think I'm being unfair when I say this. I think if you are an honest atheist, then this is probably where you land. Leo Tolstoy, you guys are familiar with him, the Russian novelist. He went through a period where he was doubting and just life, and he came sort of at a crossroads, had a lot of money, a lot of fame, and eventually started to reflect on his just on death in general. So this is what he says: "Today or tomorrow, sickness and death will come. They had come already to those I love, or to me. Nothing will remain but stench and worms. Sooner or later, my affairs, whatever they may be, will be forgotten and shall not exist. Then why go on making any effort? How can man fail to see this? And how go on living? That is what is surprising. One can only live while one is intoxicated with life. As soon as one is sober, it is impossible not to see that it is all a mere fraud, and a stupid fraud at that. That is precisely what it is. There is nothing either amusing or witty about it. It is simply cruel and stupid." So what haunted Tolstoy was the idea that you, as humans, we live with the constant knowledge of our imminent death. Now, I mean, that can be 10 years, that can be 50 years, that can be tomorrow. But the idea that we are going to die is absolutely torturous, and it almost makes fun of this, hashtag no regrets and hashtag one life, live it type of YOLO. I'm not sure if that is TGIF speak, but that type of language, it makes fun of it because you're not thinking hard enough if you don't, if you're not contemplating the implications of life without God. So Tolstoy says that if we sober up, then we realize that it is ultimately meaningless as well. And I love that one line where he says, "How can man fail to see this? How continue living?" It's as if we fool ourselves just to get up out of bed in the mornings. So another thing that I want to ask you, another reference is Children of Men. It's a sci-fi movie that was released, I'm not sure how long ago, but I guess it's 10 or 12 or somewhere there years old. It stars, it's a British sci-fi movie. It stars Clive Owen. And it's built on the premise that that mankind is infertile, so no more kids. I think the youngest kid is an Argentinian guy, and he's 25 in the movie. So baby, let's call him Baby Hernandez, and he's sort of the celebrity because he's the youngest person in the world. So it's an interesting plot. No more children. Mankind is infertile. And the one guy, sort of the protagonist of the movie, Clive Owen, he's always drunk. He's or at least on his way to being drunk, and very, very cynical about everything. At one stage, he needs help, and he goes to, I think it's his brother. So he goes to his brother, who is working with the government of England, because at that stage, everything is just going to shreds. People are protesting, people are fighting. It's a massive mess. And Clive Owen visits his brother, but his brother is he's in charge of England, so to speak. So he goes there, and there he just continues as normal. His brother, he's listening to classical music. He is, looking at all sorts of art and just trying to make England work. And eventually, as they stand by the window and they look over England, Clive Owen looks at his brother and he says, "You kill me, man. 100 years from now, there will be no one left to see all of this. What keeps you going?" And there's a moment of silence, and then it says, "You know what it is, Theo? I just don't think about it." And then they enjoy the view. So this guy is trying to run the country. Everything is going to pieces, but the only way for him to keep on going, the only way for him to listen to classical music, to pretend like he stands up in the morning and he goes to work and he tries to do something, is by not thinking about it. All right. So the point is, friends, that the same blind cosmic process that coughed us all up will eventually swallow us whole. So we know this. I'm no scientist, but eventually the universe will run out of usable energy. And the implications of that is, well, quite stark. It's there will be nobody left to remember a thing, whether you lived a life like Mother Teresa or whether you lived a life like Hitler. Ultimately, it is irrelevant. So this is what Thomas Nagel says about this. Even if you produce, this is a long quote, but this is quite profound, I think. Thomas Nagel, he says, even if you produce a great work of literature, which continues to be read thousands of years from now, eventually the solar system will cool, or the universe will wind down or collapse, and all trace of your efforts will vanish. In any case, we can't hope for even a fraction of this sort of immortality. If there's any point at all to what we do, we have to find it within our own lives. Why is there any difficulty in that? You can explain the point of most of the things you do. You work to earn money to support yourself and perhaps your family. You eat because you're hungry. You sleep because you're tired. You go for a walk, or you call up a friend because you feel like it. You read the newspaper to find out what's going on in the world. If you didn't do any of those things, you'd be miserable. So what's the big problem? The problem is that although there are justifications and explanations for most of the things, big and small, that we do within life, none of these explanations explain the point of your life as a whole, the whole of which all these activities, successes and failures, strivings and disappointments are parts. If you think about the whole thing, there seems to be no point to it at all. Looking at it from the outside, it wouldn't matter if you had ever existed. After you have gone out of existence, it won't matter that you did exist. Of course, your existence matters to other people, your parents and others who care about you, but taken as a whole, their lives have no point either. So it ultimately doesn't matter that you matter to them. You matter to them and they matter to you. And that may give your life a feeling of significance, but the whole thing doesn't really matter. So this is Thomas Nagel. He's an agnostic, and he's reflecting on the meaningless of life. As a matter of fact, I think this is an extract from the first chapter that was of his book, sort of an introduction to philosophy. So we are Sisyphus, as it were. You guys know the Greek myth of Sisyphus, where he apparently he sells intelligence secrets to the enemy, and then the gods send them to push up a rock up against the hill to only push it down again, to only push it up again. And that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to us moderns, but if you translate this into sort of a modern scenario, then it's basically, let's say at 8 o'clock in the morning, you start working and you have to do some data capturing, and you data capture, you put in all those things, a very boring work day. And 5 o'clock, the systems crash and you've got no backup. And then tomorrow morning, you start again. If the Greeks had to tell us a myth today, then that's what it would have, what it would look like. And the implications is that what we're busy with now is meaningless because of how it ends. And I think that's sort of a fair way of looking at it. So I occasionally like to play a game of golf, and I'm on this golf app, Play More Golf, and then you get to play a couple of courses across the city. And one time, Silver Lakes opened up on the app, which is great news because Silver Lakes is, I cannot afford to play there, and if it's on the app, that is great. And I go to Silver Lakes with a friend, and we're both excited about the prospect of playing this nice club. And we milk it. We go to the clubhouse and we pretend like we can afford this and that we are regulars here. If they give us a hand towel, we take 5. We're obviously not used to that kind of luxury. And we tee off, and it's just beautiful. It feels as if the fairways were cut by a nail clipper. And you continue walking, and everything is just spot on. And then the next moment, when we hit towards the green, I hit it. I see the flag, and on my way. Let's pretend that I played good golf up to that point. And when I get to the flag, I realize that there are no greens. They are redoing the greens, and they just put a flag, about 10 meters away from where the green used to be, and you can play in the middle of the fairway, and you can hit in that general direction. And here's the thing: we are playing the nicest course that we've ever played, but because the end is meaningless, because they've taken away the greens, we only lasted about 3 holes and we went home. So we were so excited about playing this very fancy course, and everything was perfect. The greens, the tee boxes, the fairways, the clubhouse, everything is lovely. But because the greens are taken out of the equation, because the end is meaningless, now everything you do up until that point feels a little bit meaningless as well. H.G. Wells, in his book The Time Machine, he tells the story of this time traveler, and the time traveler is he sort of jumps to various parts in history, and in history, and eventually he jumps so far forward that he is at the other side of this entropy collapse. In other words, there's nothing, and this is how they describe it. They say, beyond the lifeless world there was silence. All the sounds of man, the bleating of sheep, the cries of birds, the stir that makes the background to our lives, all of that was over. And then Wells's time traveler just jumps to an earlier point in history, and he is supposed to just continue to live his life. It's a wonderful way of asking, how does that guy sort of build meaning in his life if he realizes he's been able to jump to the future, whether it's 50 years or 5 million years from now. He sees how it ends, and now he needs to continue to live in a sort of meaningful way without with that knowledge. So friends, I maybe one more example. Sorry if I'm belaboring this point a little bit too much, but Fargo in the series made by the Coen brothers, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Coen brothers or Fargo, but there was this one scene, I think it's the second episode, where the lady has just been widowed, her husband died, and another lady, a colleague of her husband, goes to console her, and she goes there and she's washing dishes, and eventually they start talking, and the one just says, I remember somebody told me about this guy who queued up for ice cream, and he as he was standing there, a hail the size of a fist just struck his head out of nowhere, and he died on the spot. And so that's the opening line of that conversation. And there's a bit of silence, and eventually the other lady just asks, what flavor did he have? And then she responds, strawberry, I think. And this is Fargo or the Coen brothers' way of reflecting on death that is so imminent and so stark, and it just reminds us, it's sort of the smelling salts of life. It just reminds us of what's going on. And then by saying that, they're almost saying that the type of ice cream you like, whether it's strawberry or vanilla, is as relevant and as meaningful as a person dying or not, being struck by a piece of hail or not. So I think that is why, I mean, the Coen brothers explore it a little bit, but mostly people just stick their heads in the sand. They don't talk about it. That is maybe why it is considered rude to talk about religion and death in just general company, because people do not want to be reminded of this thing, because they spend a lot of time to remind themselves that everything is okay. So maybe that is why some people consider it rude to talk about death in these type of circles. Now, it is important to note that some atheists do, for some reason, see it not as depressing or as absurd, but as liberating. Because if there is no design, then, as Aldous Huxley said, then I am free to explore my own political and erotic desires. So there's a freedom that comes with it. Now, that is true. There is a massive freedom that comes in the absence of God. Well, I guess one can dispute that in terms of sort of materialist determinism these days. But the point is that some of them try to see a silver lining, and that silver lining for them is, you know what, I get to decide my own future. There's no God that I need to conform to, etc. Christianity, however, paints a different picture. All right. So how does Christianity relate to all of this? Well, in the Gospel of John, we read this line in the prologue of John. Let me just read a passage out of it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, and apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. Life was in him, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome it. He was in the world, and the world was created through him, yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, he gave them the right to be children of God, to those who believe in his name. So the word that is translated as word in John is logos. Now it is a very loaded term, and I mean we know it's a loaded term and it's very complex because words like dialogue, biology, psychology, logic, all of these words that we use today actually comes from this Greek word logos. But it can be legitimately translated as plan or meaning or reason. So between those three, you will have an idea of what it is. So it is considered to be the reason implicit in the cosmos. It is the force that structures the universe. And for the Greek philosophers, it was very important to try and discern the logos, because if you can do that, you can comprehend existence. Then we can figure out what we are here for, what the meaning of life is. Now, it's true, as we tried to articulate a couple of times, that if God does not exist, then nothing is ultimately ultimate. There's nothing ultimate to conform to. There's no design. There's no manual. There's no logos. So things are random. But Christianity says, no. It's not random. There is a plan. There is a telos, and there is meaning. And it is not just a created meaning. It is a meaning that we have to discover. So, how do we unpack that a little bit? So, imagine for a second somebody buys that Alexa Amazon machine, right? So it's that I don't think it's in South Africa that much, but basically you just talk to her and she's a radio, and you can order something through her, and it's a very fancy machine. So let's say somebody buys you that machine and you say, "Oh, thank you very much," and the next moment you visit them and you realize that they're using this Alexa as a doorstop. So not as anything else, but just to block the door. And let's say you go there and you say, "Look, why are you using the Alexa as a doorstop?" And then they say, "Well, it is a very handy doorstop. It's heavy enough. It just blocks the door. It's doing its job. We're very happy with it." But you're going to have to try and persuade them that they are doing this machinery a piece of disservice, because that is not the design of the Alexa. So you need to discover what is the purpose of this machine. What was it made for? What is its reason for existence? And that's not being oppressive. It's not trying to undermine your freedom, but it's the only way that you can actually realize your potential. Now, if it's true for any piece of machinery, in other words, you buy an Alexa and somebody uses it as a doorstop, or you buy somebody a nice radio and they use it as a toaster, they can do that. They have the freedom to do that, sure. But the point is that it's made for a particular thing, and for it to reach its potential, it has to be utilized in a particular way. And what is true for these machines and everything is also true for us humans. For us humans. So, because we understand the logos and meaning of life, as humans, we can live up to our potential. If we understand our reason for existence, then we will only be able to realize our potential. So John drops the bombshell eventually in this prologue, where he says, not only has he figured out the logos, which was a massive point of debate in the ancient world, and many philosophers, Greek philosophers, were trying to figure out exactly what the logos is, but he says it's knowable and it is personal. So it's not some abstract force. I think maybe that is what the Greeks were looking for when they thought of the logos. They thought it's going to be some sort of abstract force that they must just align to. But no, what John says, it's a person. And the implications for this is huge. Let me try and just unpack that for a second. So let's say you are in a poetry class and you're trying to figure out exactly what it is that the poet is trying to convey? What's the message of this particular poem? And people discuss it at length, and it's a back and forth, and you're trying to figure out exactly what it is that this poet wanted to say. And I mean, we've all done that, right? But let's say the next moment you figure out that the poet is the teacher, the person who is facilitating this whole conversation is also the poet. Then all of a sudden, you're not going to say to the teacher, well, what I think the poet actually tried to say here is this and this and this. Why? Because you have the authority there in the room with you who can tell you exactly what the meaning of the poem is. And it just settles the debate right there. And that is why that is why the author can now speak with authority, because they are the author. The guy who wrote the poem is also the author, is the authority. So what I'm trying to get at is when John reflects on all of this, he realized that God has spoken. He is the Logos. It is this personal force, and he's made himself known. So we do not have to debate anymore. We do not have to speculate what the Logos is and how we align ourselves to this magnificent force, personal force, I should add. All of that has been revealed to us. So we don't have to sort of run around in the dark anymore, trying to figure out what's the meaning of life, trying to figure out how we live up to that meaning, etc., etc. We can literally just follow and align our lives with the God who has spoken. Now, there are many things that we read about the purpose and meaning of our lives as we unpack scripture. But I mean, I'm taking a bit of a leap here. I'm just saying, first of all, that Christianity says that there is definitely a meaning to your life. And your life must align and come into connection with that of Jesus Christ. But what's interesting is as Jesus teaches us and he talks about life and the kingdom of God and meaning and telling us how to best live to our potential. Remember, on the atheistic account, there is no design. We are we were coughed up by a blind cosmic process. So nobody can really try and tell you how to live your life, which might explain the moralism that we have when some people in the church tries to tell people, no, that's not what that was made for. You cannot do this on a sexual level or whatever. But for the Christian, we say, no. We know what we were made for. We know what the plan is. We know what the Logos is. And because of that, we need to live out that particular piece of potential. Now, when God starts to speak, then we hear a few things. The one is that is very primary, is that our life, the meaning of our life, and I hope you guys are sitting for this, the meaning of our life is not about us. It's not about you. And I mean, this just goes against our current therapeutic culture, doesn't it? That says it's all about you. It's all about self-maximization. It's all about self-fulfillment. That is the therapeutic mantra. And this is what John said 2,000 years ago, and he says it today again. Nah, if you want to know what's the meaning of your life, it is not about you. It's about loving God and loving others. And love, I like Thomas Aquinas' definition, is willing the good of the other as other. In other words, it is completely not about you. So the most basic reality of this universe is not blind chance. It's not survival of the fittest. According to the Christian, the most basic reality is love. And we must align ourselves to the Logos. One of the ways in which we do it is by loving others. And this would have been shocking in the ancient world, loving others. We take that for granted. I think Nat spoke to you guys about dominion, and there are so many things that we take for granted. Love being sort of this universal value. Yeah, I mean, even the Beatles sing about it, right? Love, love, love. But they have no idea. Like, nobody in the ancient world sang about it. Julius Caesar didn't sing a song, love, love, love. It didn't happen. The only reason why the Beatles are singing that song is because it's after 2,000 years of Christianity. So this is the most basic reality that we need to align our lives with, but it's not abstract. It is, it's not that the Logos only spoke about love. It is that the Logos is love himself. And we find that in the person, of Jesus. Friends, I guess I can get a little bit practical here, but maybe it's not, very TGIF-y. So what I want to end with is this: to just recap that in the absence of God, our lives do not have any ultimate meaning. On a moral level, the same is true on a moral level. So if God does not exist and nobody's watching. There's that movie Collateral where Tom Cruise has peroxide hair and he's a hitman and he's in the car with Jamie Foxx. It's well worth watching. And he's killing these people, and Jamie Foxx asks him, "Why are you killing these people? What's with you?" And then Tom Cruise turns around and says, "What's with you? We are on this speck of dust, blindly in space. Nobody's noticing. A cop, you, me, nobody's noticing." So what he's basically saying is that because we are this cosmic accident, nobody notices whether I kill someone or whether I hug someone. It is all irrelevant. The other example, and the other implication of this on a moral level, is just think the Titanic is about 10 minutes away from going under, and you have a guy spending his last 10 minutes running around and giving everybody a hug. That's how he wants to spend his last 20 minutes. And then there's another guy, he's running around and he's taking everybody's purse because they are not attending to their valuables. So this is an ideal chance to clean them up. And in 20 minutes, everybody's going to freeze to death. So it doesn't really matter either way, does it? So eventually, whether you spend your life as a mugger or a hugger, it doesn't really matter ultimately, because it's all going to end the same and there will be nobody left to remember that. So the implications that God's non-existence has, not only on meaning, but on morality, is very, very stark indeed. And that is why there's something very naive about this new brand of atheism, celebrating it. That's not something that you saw in the previous atheists that I thought were more robust and honest about their atheism. And friends, I think, I'm not sure, I don't want to assume that all of you are Christian, but it is an incredible resource that we have as Christians, even if there are many things about our faith that doesn't make sense. And I think we must be honest enough to admit that there are many things that just sound strange, and it definitely does not. It sounds strange to us moderns. But the one thing that we have is this commitment to meaning, the fact that no, one day all of this will be used by God in this life, what we're doing now, and there will be judgment, and judgment is a good thing because it means that what we do now ultimately is meaningful. It has meaning. And then if you push that just a little bit more, then you see this wonderful proclamation that the Logos, the meaning of life, is not something abstract. It's not just giving 3 people a hug per day or just sharing your food, as good as that might be. It is a person, the person of Jesus Christ, and we need to align our lives to him so that we can live the most meaningful life that we can possibly do, because he is the author of our lives, and we have to go to the author to live with authority.
So let me then just throw you the first question. So I was a little bit amused that you said, let me get practical. Oh no, that's not very TGIF-y. Where were you going to go had you thought that TGIF was in any way practical?
at the transfiguration, Jesus, when Jesus is transfigured, there's this voice that says, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." Or no, I'm lying, not the beloved son bit, but just listen to him, keep his commands, listen to him. And what will happen as soon as we listen to God? I think we will not just sort of live in this abstract way of saying, oh yeah, Jesus died for our sins, and that is great and everything is fine. I think if we really listen to Jesus, then we will take his moral teachings also a little bit more serious. And maybe I'm a hypocrite as well when it comes to this, but that'll mean the things that Jesus said about our possessions, about loving the enemy, about how we relate to this world in this countercultural and radical way, that will all of a sudden come into play. And what I've seen is that the people who generally struggle with the questions of meaning are middle class people. And there are middle class people living in North America or Australia or Europe. Those are the people with a meaning issue. In Africa, we do not have a meaning issue. In Asia, not the super affluent bits, there's also not a meaning issue. And I think one of the reasons why we don't struggle with meaning, is because we find meaning, a lot of it, when we do these basic things, when we share, when we help the poor, when we are reminded of our own mortality by seeing how fragile life is elsewhere. And that is one of the wonderful gifts that a country like South Africa gives us. So even though most of the TGIFers are on Zoom and we are hopelessly middle class and super comfortable, the fact of the matter is that you're going to have to live very deep inside Steyn City to maintain the idea that this is how everybody lives. Because if you just go out on the street, you'll see that there is suffering. And I think that is an opportunity to live out a lot of the morality that Jesus calls us to live. And what you'll find is, even though you didn't maybe look for it directly, you're going to find meaning. So C.S. Lewis talks about the Eldils in one of his in one of his space trilogy sci-fi books. And the Eldils are these wonderful creatures. They are just lovely, and it makes you feel so good, but you cannot look at them directly. You have to, you always just see them from the side of your eye. And the meaning that C.S. Lewis is trying to convey, or what the message is, that the Eldils are like joy. They are like meaning. You cannot look at them directly. They surprise you from the side. And it's almost as if Jesus is calling us to live a life of service, to live a life of sacrifice. And then you will find that meaning sort of sneaks up on you on the side. But it's not something that you can look up directly. It's not something I can say, I'm looking for meaning today. To a certain extent, that is true. But when you come to Jesus, that meaning is to send you to God, to love God and to love others. It's outside of yourself. And then before you know it, by doing various acts of kindness, and more than that, I don't want to trivialize it, living this life of love, then all of a sudden joy and meaning captures you. There's a chat. Johan, can you unpack a little the meaning inherent in the fact that the church is ecclesia, so much bigger than a Christian club, so much more influential? Yeah, so maybe that is the where dominion comes into play a little bit, is maybe we need to rediscover the fact that before Jesus came, before a follower of his called Paul said that all humans are equal in Galatians 3:28, the first egalitarian statement in history, nobody did that. Nobody said that before. You didn't find that line in the ancient world. Before, followers of Jesus in the form of Gregory of Nyssa, the so-called Cappadocian, the Turkish, modern-day Turkish church fathers, before they started hospitals, you didn't have something like hospitals. And they did it because they followed Jesus, and they believed that Matthew 25, if you help the least of these, then you're doing it to Christ himself. I find it very encouraging to see how the church historically in various parts of the world has listened to the call of Jesus, and is just resolute in trying to, in their insignificant way, to bring a little bit of heaven on earth. And I mean, I'm thinking of the Clapham sect in England. These guys were John Newton and William Wilberforce and Elizabeth Fry, and some of these thinkers. A small church in England. I when I was there, in the previous dispensation, when that was allowed, when I was there, John Newton had this very small church where all these rock stars were, the William Wilberforces of the world and whatever. And if you just map the impact that these guys were able to achieve through resolutely following God, it was just so encouraging. Likewise, I am very suspicious of the way that we are talking about race today in this world. And I think one of the reasons why I'm suspicious is because the church is not in control of that narrative anymore. But before that, you had the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, who just melted the hearts of the world and just exposed stupid Jim Crow law racism by speaking, by delivering a message of forgiveness and love and reconciliation. And likewise, Albert Luthuli as well. These were people that for them, church was not just a social club. It was calling them to a higher ideal, and it called them to do these things because, one, it mattered. What happens in this world matters, but secondly, there's a particular way in which we do it, in grace, in love, and in forgiveness, and bringing people in. The list goes on, but the fact of the matter is, even I, as an Afrikanerkie here in Pretoria, I stand in that great tradition, and I sometimes think that that's something that we need to discover again, to really get excited about the bigger picture that we are a part of, and the fact that Jesus is ultimately going to use all our various contributions, whether it is a prayer, whether it is reading a piece of scripture to somebody who cannot read it at that moment because they are sick, whether it is picking up rubbish, all of those things. This is the silly thing that Christians believe will ultimately be used by God in his new creation. And you might say that's unbelievable, and that's fair enough, but it is very meaningful. You cannot say that it's not meaningful, because that's the one thing it definitely is. What we do now as individuals and as churches will ultimately be used by God as he creates this new heavens and earth.